Hi everyone, welcome to the symposium. I'm Chu Junlin, a postdoc at the Department of Psychological and Brain Science at Dartmouth College. I'm very excited to share with you our work, Four Dimensions Characterize Trait Impressions of Faces. First, what is the dimensional approach? Let's first look at an example that we are familiar with. We can perceive and have words for a wide spectrum of different colors. However, our mind does not have a distinct representation for every one of these different colors. Instead, human eyes only have three types of cones that are sensitive to light of different wavelengths. It is the combination of these three color dimensions, blue, red, green, at different values, that give rise to the color violet, as well as all the other different colors on the spectrum. Similarly, when people look at faces, we spontaneously form impressions about their general dispositions, such as whether they seem to be affectionate, sociable, or intelligent. Are the various trait impressions we form from faces the result of the combination of just a few trait dimensions, say femininity, youthfulness, and competence? If so, the impression of someone looking sociable may just be a combination of someone looking 35% feminine, 12% youthful, and 8% competent. Understanding what dimensions underlie trait impression of faces is crucial to efficient modeling at different levels, such as identifying key mechanisms with which the brain generates these impressions, and predicting key types of biases and stereotypes in social interactions. Research in this field typically first identifies a few frequently used words that describe trait impressions of faces. Then researchers ask participants to rate different faces on each word, typically using a Likert scale like this. Finally, using the faces ratings on different trait words, researchers analyze the underlying dimensions. Previous work have looked at around 10 commonly used trait words and found different dimensions. However, it turns out that people use way more words to describe their trait impressions of faces. Dimensions that discover with just those few frequently used traits are not likely to be generalizable to describe all the other trait impressions. By analogy, much psychology research has emphasized on representatively sampling study participants because conclusions generated from weird samples are not well generalizable to the population. Based on the same rationale, to derive dimensions that are most comprehensive, we will want to also representatively sample stimuli, such as trait words. Practically, this is a very challenging task, since these are more abstract words instead of participants who we know could be sampled based on a list of properties such as age, gender, race, education, etc. What properties should be used to representatively sample words? To tackle this challenge, we apply state-of-the-art neural network. We first gather an inclusive list of around 500 trait words from the English dictionary. Many of these words have very similar meaning, and it is not necessary to ask participants to rate all of them. To understand the relation between all words efficiently, we apply a state-of-the-art deep neural network. This network quantifies each word into a 300-dimensional vector. These vectors are specialized in representing the semantic properties between the words. Words that are more similar in the meaning, like synonyms and antonyms, have more similar vector values. Words that are more different in their meaning or in the context that they are applied have more different vector values. Thus, we now have a list of properties that we could use to describe the words and understand which ones are redundant. Using this method, we selected a representative set of 100 trait words. Similarly, we apply a deep neural network to representative sample faces. This network was trained to recognize identity based on facial structure. These factors describe the properties of how similar or different the faces are in terms of their facial structure. Based on these properties, we representatively sample a subset of 100 faces. We conducted 2 large-scale pre-register studies, where we asked participants from different world regions to rate the 100 faces on 100 traits. We first analyzed the data from the US sample in Study 1. For each face and each trait, we aggregated the ratings across participants. Using this aggregated data of the 100 faces ratings on the 100 traits, we can analyze the underlying dimensions. We use both linear and nonlinear methods. Linear methods included exploratory factor analysis and principal component analysis. We use these 2 different methods because prior research has shown that methodological differences could lead to different dimension discoveries. We first determine how many dimensions most efficiently capture the variance in the data. There's not a single method regarded the best for this estimation. Therefore, we applied 5 different methods, and 4 of them converge on a 4-dimension solution. We use EFA and PCA to extract 4 dimensions. The results returned from this analysis tells us how strongly the 100 trait impressions listed in the y-axis are related to the 4 extracted dimensions listed in the columns. I'm showing results of EFA for a subset of trait impressions here. PCA also confirmed this result. For example, this result suggests that the impression of someone looking like a critical person is mostly about how they look on the first trait dimension, and adding just a tiny bit of dimension 2 and dimension 4. Just using these 4 dimensions, we were able to explain 85% of the variance in how the 100 trait impressions were related to each other. We interpreted these 4 dimensions as summarizing impressions about others' warmth, competence, femininity, and youth. We verified these dimension labels using quantitative methods and independent human subject ratings. We also verified that these dimensions are quantitatively different from previously found dimensions, such as valence and dominance. We did so by computing the correlations between a pair of dimension loadings. This analysis indicated that even though semantically we may feel that the label warmth is semantically similar to the previously proposed valence dimension, the 2 are only weakly to moderately correlated. And although semantically we may feel that the label competence is similar to the previously proposed dominance dimension, the 2 are not significantly correlated. Only using linear methods may ignore trait impressions that are meaningfully related but not in a linear way. Therefore, we also analyze the dimensions of the data using a nonlinear method, artificial neural network. This network has 3 layers. Input layer, where for each face we enter its ratings on the 100 traits. Then the goal of the network is to compress this data in the 100 trait representations into a lower dimensional space in this hidden layer, such as 4 dimensions in this example. And eventually, we hope that after the compression, when we expand the data back to its original 100 trait representation, the output would be as similar to the input as possible. We trained neural networks with different number of dimensions in the hidden layer and allow for nonlinear activation functions in the network. The results show that a neural net with 4 dimensions in the hidden layer achieved performance plateau. More importantly, the relation between the 100 traits and the 4 dimensions learned by this neural network reproduced the dimension loadings we found in the linear methods. These results indicate that the 4 dimensions we found here are highly robust across analytical methods. These 4 dimensions are robust in the US sample. However, we don't know how well they generalize to the samples from other world regions. Therefore, we next analyze the data from each of the 7 samples we collected in Study 2. In this plot, the x-axis indicates the number of dimensions, and the y-axis indicates how much common variance in the data that dimension explained. The first 4 dimensions accounted for most of the common variance in the data across all samples. We next verify whether the 4 dimensions found in different samples are the same as the 4 dimensions we saw in the US sample. Here we list the US 4 dimensions in the columns, and the 4 dimensions found in the North America sample in Study 2 in the rows. We can compute the congruence index between the two sets of 4 dimensions in the diagonal. This congruence index measures the coexistence distance between two sets of dimension loadings. The statistical significance was estimated using permutation tests. The high congruence value along the diagonals indicates that the 4 dimensions discovered from the North American sample in Study 2 are highly similar to the 4 dimensions discovered from the US sample in Study 1. Here is another example comparing the Latvia sample with the US sample, comparing the Peru sample with the US sample. A highlight of this comparison is that in Peru, we used a different language to implement the task. All materials were translated into Spanish. Nevertheless, we still see a high similarity between samples. This last example compared the Gaza sample with the US samples. These findings show that the warmth, competence, femininity, youth dimensions are reproducible across world regions. While reproducibility across samples is great news, but we still have not ruled out the possibility that these dimensions are an artifact of aggregating the data across participants. Can we reproduce the same 4 dimensions in a single participant's data? In Study 2, we had every participant rated all phases on all traits, taking approximately 10 hours of testing time spread across several testing days. This dense data make it possible for us to analyze the dimensions using every single participant's data. Here, I show the results indicating the optimal number of dimensions in each participant's data. The x-axis indicates the different number of dimensions, and the y-axis indicates the counts of participants whose data indicated the optimal number of dimensions as listed in the x-axis. Again, a 4-dimensional structure is most prevalent across individual participants. More importantly, we reproduce the same 4 dimensions as in the US samples in individual participants. For example, this is a participant from the Latvia sample. Again, the column indicates the 4 dimensions found in the US sample, and the rows indicate the 4 dimensions found in this participant's data. The diagonal values indicate how similar the two sets of 4 dimensions are. This is another example of a participant from the Gaza sample, a participant from the Peru sample, and a participant from the Philippines sample. These findings show that the warmth, competence, femininity, youth dimensions are reproducible at the individual level. We also know that we did observe quite a bit individual differences here. In summary, I have shown you that, first, state-of-the-art deep neural networks provide great potential for representatively sampling highly complex stimuli, such as faces and words. Representatively sampling stimuli is as crucial as representatively sampling participants. However, the former has been proven technically very difficult due to the complex and abstract nature of stimuli. Our work first established the potential of state-of-the-art computational models in tackling crucial stimuli sampling problems in psychology research. This pipeline could be applied to a wide range of other stimuli sampling, such as videos and conversations, which is particularly exciting as we move towards more naturalistic stimuli as a field. Using comprehensive and representatively stimuli sampled from these state-of-the-art methods, we discover 4 dimensions that summarize how people form impressions from faces. They describe how warm, competent, feminine, and youthful people look. It is the combination of these 4 core dimensions that generate all the spectrum of different trait impressions we form. We show that these 4 dimensions are extremely robust, both across analytical methods and world regions. We also reproduce these 4 dimensions in individual participants' data, which confirm the validity of these 4 dimensions. They provide exciting candidates for future research on the neurological mechanisms of face impressions and potential targets for anti-bias interventions. One important limitation of the current study is that all the faces we used here were white with neutral facial expressions and taken in standardized studio conditions. It is very likely that the race and facial expression of the faces, as well as the context of the photographs, like where they were taken, would all influence how people form trait impressions of faces. We are currently working on a project that examines these factors. Another clear limitation of the current study, and largely of the research in this field, is how we collected this trait impression data. We show people a face, a trait word, and force them to make an evaluation on that trait and face. In everyday life, we don't really form impression of faces like that. We may glance at a face, form certain impressions without explicitly using the word or rating scales. A great challenge and also a great opportunity of the field could be to explore more naturalistic paradigms to study face impressions. Finally, I would like to thank my collaborators and my lab mates, and thank you all for listening.